Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive all about heat training. We're going to figure out how heat can actually boost your performance. And this goes whether you're like hardcore training for a marathon in some crazy heat, or just want to level up your regular workouts. Step it up a notch.
It is pretty cool stuff. And we've got a lot to dig into. We've got research articles. We've even got stories from athletes who've actually used heat training to, push their limits.
Okay, so first things first. Let's get on the same page here. When we say heat acclimation or acclimatization, what do we actually mean?
All right, so acclimation. That's when you're kind of intentionally exposing yourself to the heat. Think sauna. Think maybe one of those fancy heat chambers. Acclimatization, though, that's more natural. You're living somewhere hot or training there consistently, and your body just kind of adapts over time.
So it's like if you move to a tropical island,
Right.
you gradually get used to that heat. That's acclimatization. But if you're training for a race somewhere hot, and you're hitting the sauna every week to get ready, that's more like the acclimation we're talking about.
Exactly. And both ways, your body changes in some pretty awesome ways.
Speaking of awesome changes, we're going to be looking at research from this guy, Dr. Minson. And he works with athletes in this heat chamber that can mimic all kinds of crazy environments. We're talking deserts, we're talking mountaintops, the whole shebang.
And the cool part is he uses that controlled environment to help athletes prep for competitions, even if those competitions are in cooler places.
Which seems a little counterintuitive, right? Why train in the heat if you're going to be racing somewhere chilly?
That's where the science gets super interesting. Heat training, it can actually make you better even when you're not in the heat. And this all ties back to this concept called hormesis.
Hormesis. Okay. That sounds intense. Can you break that down for us?
So basically, when you expose your body to a little bit of stress, in a controlled way, heat, it makes you tougher in the long run. It's kind of like lifting weights.
Right.
You tear down the muscle to build it back stronger.
Okay, so I'm seeing the connection here. You're stressing your body out a bit with the heat to make it tougher overall.
Yeah.
Even when you're not in that super hot environment.
Exactly. And there's research to back this up. The Lucci Human Performance Alliance, they found that heat acclimation, it actually helped athletes improve by 7% in a bunch of different endurance tests. That's a pretty big deal.
7%? Whoa! That's impressive. Okay, so we've established heat training can be pretty awesome. But is it for everyone? Should everyone be doing this?
That's a good question. And while heat training can be a really powerful tool, it's not something you want to just jump into without a good foundation. Dr. Minson, he's a big believer in having the basics down first.
Okay, basics. What are we talking here?
I'm talking nutrition, sleep recovery, all those essential things. You got to have those dialed in before you start adding in the stress of heat training.
Right. It's like trying to build a house on a shaky foundation. You need that solid base first.
Exactly. If you're new to training or still working on those fundamentals, heat training might not be the best move right now. Focus on building that strong base first.
That makes sense. So let's say you've got the fundamentals locked in. You're ready to explore this heat training thing. What's actually happening in your body when you get used to the heat? It can't just be that you get better at feeling hot.
Oh, it's way more than that. It's like your whole body adapts. It's like your body's getting a system upgrade for its internal cooling system and just its ability to handle stress.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What kind of upgrades are we talking?
Well, for starters, your cardiovascular system, it gets a boost. Your heart rate, it doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood. And you actually have more blood volume. So more oxygen gets to your muscles.
That's like a performance upgrade for your heart and your whole circulatory system.
Exactly. And then there's your thermoregulation. That's how your body controls its temperature. You get better at sweating. That's your main way to cool down.
Yeah.
And more blood flows to your skin, which helps get rid of heat.
It's like your body becomes this super efficient heat dissipating machine.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it goes even deeper than that. Heat acclimation affects how your body uses energy. And it even changes things at the cellular level. You start producing these things called heat shock proteins.
Heat shock proteins. Wow. Okay. What are those all about?
These proteins are pretty cool. They basically protect your cells. They help them deal with stress and recover faster. And that's especially helpful when you're pushing your body in a hot environment.
So it's like you've got this built-in repair crew for your muscles, working overtime to keep things running smoothly, even when it's tough.
Exactly. And all these changes, from your heart and blood to your cells, they all work together to make you a stronger athlete overall.
All right, so we've got this whole body upgrade happening. But I'm still curious about how this translates to better performance, especially in cooler conditions. Got any research that can shed some light on that?
We do. There's this one study from Endure IQ. They looked at how heat training could make cyclists better, even when they were racing in cooler temps. And they found that after 3 weeks of heat training, these cyclists, they actually had more power during a 30-minute time trial. And this time trial was in normal, cool conditions.
So it's not just about feeling better, you can actually measure the improvement.
Exactly. And there's this really cool visual in an article from the Global Sports Science Initiative. They have this diagram that shows how your body adapts to heat. And it literally looks like your internal AC is getting a serious upgrade.
Okay, so I'm picturing those classic signs, like lower heart rate, lower body temperature, more sweat. But are there other adaptations happening that we might not even realize?
Definitely. We already talked about how heat training increases blood volume. And that's huge for getting oxygen to your muscles so you can go harder for longer.
More blood, more oxygen, more power.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Right. And then there's this thing where your body gets better at holding on to sodium when you sweat. Sodium's an important electrolyte, especially when you're sweating a lot. So this is really important for figuring out how to stay hydrated during training.
Hydration and electrolytes, even more important when you're heat training.
Got it. And then, of course, there are those heat shock proteins. We talked about those earlier. They help your cells deal with stress. So that could mean faster recovery after hard workouts and less damage overall.
So it's like having this built-in defense system protecting your body from all that wear and tear.
Exactly. And even though a lot of the research focuses on, like, elite athletes, these changes can benefit anyone who wants to handle heat better, be more resilient, and just push their limits, whether they're a serious athlete or not.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've got the science, we've got the how-to. Now I want to hear from someone who's actually experienced this. What's it like to actually do heat training?
Great idea. Let's talk about Malia Pivc. She's a runner, and she's featured in a WUSI article. She's been training in Dr. Minson's heat chamber and seeing some awesome results.
Perfect. Let's get the athlete's perspective. What was it like for her?
Well, Malia, she made heat training a regular part of her routine. She was very specific about how she did it based on her races. And she talked about training in this hot box, that's what she called it. And she said it felt like a sauna. Not always fun, but it definitely paid off.
Not a walk in the park, but worth it.
Exactly. And the biggest thing for her was that after doing this heat training, the heat just didn't feel as bad anymore. It gave her this mental edge, especially during one race where it was really hot and she ended up doing even better than she expected.
That's amazing. It's not just about the physical changes. It's about the mental toughness, too.
Absolutely. That mental strength can make a huge difference when things get challenging.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, the changes the athletes experience. Now I'm curious, how can someone listening actually make this work for them? How can they do heat training safely and get the most out of it?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into next.
Okay, so let's get practical here. We've heard about the awesome potential of this heat training. But how do we actually make it work? What are the top tips from all this research we've been looking at?
Well, first and foremost, safety first. You don't want to go crazy, especially if you're new to this. Start gradually, listen to your body, and it's always a good idea to work with a coach, someone who really understands heat training.
Makes sense. Starting slow and steady. But what does that look like? What are we actually doing?
Think about it like slowly increasing the challenge. Start with shorter exposures to heat, not too intense. And then as you adapt, you can gradually increase the time and the intensity. It's a process, not a race to the finish line.
Okay, so start small, gradually up the ante. But how do you know when it's okay to turn up the heat? How do you know your body's handling it okay? Or maybe that you need to back off a bit?
That's where it's all about listening to your body, really paying attention. How's your heart rate? What about your breathing? How hard does it feel? Are you getting that feeling of being overexerted? If your heart's racing, like it's about to burst out of your chest, or you're super tired, or you're feeling dizzy or nauseous, those are all signs that you need to ease up.
So it's not about just pushing through no matter what. It's about finding that sweet spot, challenging yourself, but not totally overwhelming your system.
Exactly. Heat acclimation. It's about working with your body, not against it. And that brings up another point. Your goals. What are you actually trying to achieve with this? Are you aiming for a specific race in a hot place, or just trying to be more resilient overall?
Right, because the approach is going to be different depending on what you're going for.
For sure. If you have a target race, timing is everything. You want to start acclimating weeks or even months ahead of time, and you want to gradually increase that heat exposure so it matches what you'll experience on race day.
So it's about being specific, right? If your race is going to be in a humid place, your heat training should be humid too. You need to match the environment as closely as possible.
Absolutely. Don't just sit in a dry sauna. You got to think about how to really recreate those race conditions.
So I'm picturing people running on treadmills in steam rooms, or bundled up in layers to mimic race day. It sounds kind of crazy, but it makes sense if you want to be fully prepared.
Okay, so when it comes to actually working out in the heat, what should people be doing?
That's a really common question. And it's important to remember, heat training isn't about going all out in every workout. Like you're in some kind of inferno. You don't need to destroy yourself every time. So not every run has to be a sauna session.
Exactly. You got to be strategic. Heat is a tool. It's there to help you adapt, not to punish you. And remember that idea of periodization? It applies here too. You might have a block of time where you focus on heat training, maybe when you're building your base, or working on specific adaptations.
So maybe you spend a few weeks doing heat training to increase your blood volume and get better at cooling down. And then you switch back to cooler conditions when it's time to really ramp up the intensity and work on speed.
Exactly. It's all about using heat strategically to get better overall. And it goes back to that point about listening to your body. You wouldn't try to run your fastest intervals in a sauna, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Work smarter, not harder, as they say.
Exactly. And it all comes back to listening to your body. Heat training can be amazing, but you have to pay attention to how you're feeling and adjust as needed.
No need to be a hero. If you're exhausted or dizzy or feel like your heart's going to explode, it's time to back off, lower the intensity, or just take a break.
Absolutely. No shame in taking care of yourself. It's the most important thing for making progress in the long run. And speaking of taking care of yourself, we got to talk about hydration and electrolytes.
Yeah, we touched on this earlier, but it's worth repeating, especially when you're sweating so much. What are the key takeaways for staying properly hydrated and fueled during those hot sessions?
The golden rule. Don't wait until you're thirsty. By then, you're already behind. You want to be drinking consistently throughout the day, especially before, during, and after being in the heat.
Make hydration a habit, not a last resort.
Right.
Okay, what about electrolytes? How do we make sure we're replacing what we lose through all that sweat?
Sports drinks, those are a good option, especially when you're working out hard or for a long time in the heat. But if you want something more natural, you can try electrolyte tablets or powders. You can just add them to your water.
And don't forget about real food. Fruits and veggies like bananas, avocados, spinach. They're full of electrolytes too.
For sure. It's all about giving your body the fuel it needs to perform at its best. And besides hydration and electrolytes, you want to make sure you're eating a balanced diet. Carbs for energy, protein for muscle recovery, healthy fats to keep you feeling full, and for hormone balance.
So heat training's not an excuse to eat whatever you want. It's actually even more important to fuel your body properly.
Exactly. And remember those awesome heat shock proteins we talked about. They help your cells deal with stress and recover faster. So you got to give your body the nutrients it needs to support them.
All right, so we've covered gradual adaptation, specificity, hydration, electrolytes, overall nutrition. Anything else people should keep in mind as they start exploring heat training?
One more thing. We've talked about the science, the strategies, the importance of listening to your body. But there's one more piece to this puzzle, and it's a big one. The mental game.
The mental game.
Yeah.
That's so true. It's one thing to understand all the science and the strategies, but it's another thing to actually do it, to embrace that challenge and push through the discomfort of heat training.
Totally. It's not just a physical test. It's a mental one, too. It's about building resilience, that grit, and learning to stay focused and calm even when things get tough.
It's like you're training your mind to be as strong as your body.
Exactly. And remember Malia Pivc, the runner we talked about? She mentioned how heat training actually helped her mentally during a race. It was like she had built up this mental toughness, this ability to just push through the discomfort, and that gave her a real advantage.
Yeah, like her mind was already prepared for the heat, so when it hit during the race, she was ready.
It's amazing how connected the mental and physical sides of training are.
For sure. And there's actually research that backs this up. That Endure IQ article, they talked about how heat stress, it can actually trigger your body to release certain hormones, like adrenaline. And that can make you more focused, more alert.
So it's not just your body getting a workout. Your mind's getting one, too.
Exactly. And even that Global Sports Science Initiative article, the one that was super sciencey, they talked about this idea of thermal comfort. They said that as you get used to the heat, you actually start to feel more comfortable in those hotter conditions.
Interesting. So instead of freaking out when it gets hot, you're able to stay calm, cool, and collected, both mentally and physically. Exactly. And that mental strength, that ability to stay focused when things get tough, that can help you in all areas of life, not just sports.
It's like a superpower.
Yeah.
And it all starts with embracing that challenge, building that mental resilience through heat training.
I like that. And speaking of superpowers, let's think about this. What about the average person, someone who's not an elite athlete? can they still benefit from incorporating some heat into their routine?
That's a great question, because we've been talking a lot about these high-performing athletes. But the ideas behind heat acclimation, they can really apply to anyone who wants to handle heat better, improve their overall well-being, and maybe even discover some hidden potential they didn't know they had.
Totally. It's about pushing our boundaries a little bit and exploring what the human body can do.
So even if you're not training for some crazy ultramarathon in Death Valley, you can still get something out of this.
For sure. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It could be as simple as spending time in a sauna or hot tub after a workout. Or maybe going for a light jog outside on a warm day. Start slow and gradually increase the time and intensity.
That sounds doable. And I remember that Global Sports Science Initiative article. They mentioned something called overdress training. That sounded kind of fun.
Oh, yeah. That's when you basically bundle up in extra layers during your workout. You're creating that heat stress without needing any special equipment.
I can see that being appealing to people who don't have a sauna or who just like to train outside. It's about finding creative ways to challenge your body and make it adapt.
Exactly. And remember, common sense is key. Don't overdo it. Pay attention to your body. Stay hydrated. And always put your well-being first.
Safety first. Always. Okay, so with all this talk about heat training, I'm kind of curious. What about other unconventional training methods? Are there other things out there that can help us unlock our potential?
That's what's so cool about human performance. There's always something new to discover, new limits to push. Remember that question from the Endure IQ article? If heat can make us better in cooler conditions, what other weird training methods might be out there?
That got me thinking. What about altitude training or training in the cold? Could those have some unexpected benefits too?
There's actually evidence for both of those. Altitude training has been popular with endurance athletes for ages, and research shows it can boost red blood cell production, so you get better at carrying oxygen throughout your body.
And I've heard about cold exposure therapy becoming more popular with athletes too. Something about faster recovery and less inflammation.
Yeah, cold water immersion cryotherapy, it's definitely getting attention. And while the research is still pretty new, there are studies showing potential benefits for muscle soreness, recovery time, maybe even immune function.
It's amazing to think about all the different ways we can train our bodies and minds to adapt and get stronger. It's like we're constantly rewriting the rules of what's possible.
It really is. And I think the most important thing for our listeners today is that there's no one right way to train. It's about trying different things, experimenting, finding what works best for you, your goals, your body, and what you enjoy.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive into heat training, I want to leave everyone with a sense of empowerment.
Yeah.
The knowledge we've shared today, it's a tool. It's up to you how you use it, how you make it part of your own journey, whether you're trying to improve your performance or just learn more about yourself.
I love that. The journey is yours. So embrace the challenge, stay curious, and never stop exploring what you're capable of.
Beautifully said. And with that inspiring message, we've reached the end of our deep dive into heat training. We hope you enjoyed the exploration as much as we did.
It's been awesome sharing this with you. And for anyone who wants to dig even deeper into the research and the practical stuff, we've got links to all the articles in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep pushing those boundaries, and let's keep that passion for human potential burning bright.